Welcome to The Picture of Dorian Gray, Chapter 18. You may recall in the previous chapter, Dorian Gray at his Selby country home went into a swoon or a faint because he saw at the glass on top of the door, looking in, the face of James Vane. And this continues that story, what happens to James and Dorian at the country home. So Dorian's paranoid to go out. The next day he did not leave the house, and indeed spent most of the time in his own room, sick with the wild terror of dying, and yet indifferent to life itself, not really caring about life itself. The consciousness of being hunted, snared, tracked down had begun to dominate him. When he closed his eyes, he saw again the sailor's face peering through the mist-stained glass, and horror seemed once more to lay its hand upon his heart. But perhaps it had been only his fancy, his imagination, that had called vengeance out of the night and set the hideous shapes of punishment before him. Had any footprints been found on the flower beds, the gardeners would have reported it. Yes, it had been merely fancy or imagination. Sybil Vane's brother had not come back to kill him. He'd sailed away in his ship to flounder in some winter sea. From him, at any rate, he was safe. Why, the man did not know who he was, could not know who he was. The mask of youth had saved him. Back at the opium den when Dorian said, "Could this be the face of someone who knew your sister all those years ago?" Dorian now remembering some of his sins, growing pale with terror. The air becomes colder. Oh, in what a wild hour of madness he'd killed his friend Basil. How ghastly the mere memory of the scene! He saw it all again. Each hideous detail came back to him with added horror. Out of the black cave of time, terrible and swathed in scarlet, rose the image of his sin. When Lord Henry came in at 6 o'clock, he found him crying as one whose heart will break. Doesn't go out for 3 days. Goes out walking in the garden with the Duchess, and sees Sir Geoffrey Clouston, the Duchess's brother, jerking 2 spent cartridges out of his gun. This is hunting. Jolly oldie upper-class sport. They use here, you need to know this, people called beaters. These are lower-class people who sent out to make a noise in the bushes, to beat out anything that might be hunted. Here's a rabbit they see, suddenly from a lumpy tussock of old grass, some 20 yards in front of them, with black-tipped ears erect and long hinder limbs throwing it forward, started a hare. It's a rabbit getting a fright. It bolted or ran for a thicket of alders, trees. Sir Geoffrey put his gun to his shoulder, but there was something in the animal's grace of movement that strangely charmed Dorian Gray, and he cried out at once, "Don't shoot it, Geoffrey. Let it live." Is this a last-minute moment of mercy from Dorian? "What nonsense, Dorian," laughed his companion, and as the hare bounded into the thicket, he fired. There were 2 cries heard, the cry of a hare in pain, which is dreadful, the cry of a man in agony, which is worse. "Good heavens, I've hit a beater," one of those guys employed to hit the bushes, exclaimed Sir Geoffrey. "What an ass the man was to get in front of the guns. Stop shooting there," he called at the top of his voice. "A man is hurt." The head keeper comes running. Sir Geoffrey says, "Here, why on earth don't you keep your men back? Spoiled my shooting for the day." Typical selfish attitude of the upper class, just worried about his own shooting being spoiled. Dorian wonders, turns away in horror. It seemed to him that misfortune or accident or tragedy follows wherever he goes. He heard Sir Geoffrey ask if the man was really dead, and the affirmative answer of the keeper, the affirmative meaning yes. The wood or the forest seemed to him to have become suddenly alive with faces. There was the trampling of myriad feet, many feet, and the low buzz of voices. A great copper-breasted pheasant, a bird, came beating through the boughs or branches overhead. "Dorian," said Lord Henry, "I'd better tell them that the shooting is stopped for today. It would not look well to go on." "I wish it were stopped for ever, Harry," he answered bitterly. "The whole thing is hideous and cruel. Is the man—" He could not finish the sentence. Something there indicating some sensitivity that this is a hideous and cruel sport. "Yes, he's dead," Henry tells him. Dorian here says he thinks that this whole thing is a very bad omen. Earlier we just read he thinks bad luck follows him. "What is it?" asked Lord Henry. "Oh, this accident. It can't be helped. It was the man's own fault. Why did he get in front of the guns? It's nothing to us. It's rather awkward for Geoffrey, of course. It does not do to pepper beaters to shoot at these guys. It makes people, and it's a joke because you think his reason for saying that would be, they're humans, don't kill them. But he says, no, it makes people think that one's a wild shot. And Geoffrey's not. He shoots very straight. There's no use talking about the matter." Dorian shook his head. "It's a bad omen, Henry. Bad omen. I feel as if something horrible were going to happen to us, some of us. To myself, perhaps. The only horrible thing in the world is ennui, Dorian. Ennui, mixture of laziness and boredom. Sickness of the wealthy classes. That's the one sin for which there's no forgiveness. Mixture of laziness and boredom. Ennui. But we are not likely to suffer from it unless these fellows keep chattering about this thing at dinner. I must tell them that the subject is to be tabooed. As for omens, there's no such thing as an omen or a sign. Destiny does not send us heralds. Fate does not send us messages beforehand. She's too wise or too cruel for that. Besides, what on earth could happen to you, Dorian? You have everything in the world that a man can want. There's no one who would not be delighted to change places with you. How ironic, because we know how rotten Dorian's soul is now. Dorian, of course, knows, and he says, "There's no one with whom I would not change places, Harry. Don't laugh like that. I'm telling the truth." Of course, Harry wouldn't understand. "The wretched pheasant who has just died is better off than I am. I have no terror of death. It is the coming of death that terrifies me. Its monstrous wings seem to wheel in the leaden air around me. Good heavens, don't you see a man moving behind the trees there, watching me, waiting for me?" So you'd think this would be horror of sin, but it's actually just scared of James Vane. Looks to me that way. Lord Henry looked in that direction. He says, "Yes, I see the gardener waiting for you." Dorian heaved a sigh of relief. "There's a letter. Her Grace says, yes, I'm coming in. A woman will flirt with anybody as long as other people are watching. How fond you are of saying dangerous things, Harry. Was that significant, considering the novel as a whole? Scandal. I'm skipping all the scandals. You would sacrifice. This is quite a good one. You would sacrifice anybody, Harry, for the sake of an epigram, for the sake of one of your wise sayings. You'd sacrifice anyone. The world goes to the altar of its own accord. I wish I could love. My own personality has become a burden to me. I've lost the passion. I'm too much concentrated on myself. I want to escape. Wants to go on a yacht. On a yacht, one is safe. Safe from what, Dorian? Are you in some trouble? You know I would help you. Tell you, and I dare say it's only a fancy. This unfortunate accident has upset me. I have a horrible presentiment that something of the kind may happen to me. What nonsense. I hope it is, but I can't help it. You've come back, Duchess. But Geoffrey's upset, and it seems you've asked him not to shoot the hare. How curious. And that's the rabbit. Yes, it looked the loveliest of little live things. Dorian feeling mercy for the rabbit, ironically. I'm sorry they told you about the man. It's an annoying subject, broke in Lord Henry. And then Lord Henry says he'd like to know someone who committed a real murder. Also, how ironically, how horrid of you, Harry. Isn't it, Mr. Grey? And then Mr. Grey has a turn. He starts feeling faint again. He recovers. My nerves are dreadfully out of order, he says. But of course, perhaps that fit is brought on by Harry saying that. He wishes he knew someone who'd committed a murder, because he does. Dorian says that's because he walked too far this morning. Even hear what Harry said. Excuse me. And then it turns out this Duchess, of course, is another one in love with Dorian. And she doesn't even know how much in love she is. And he warns her that it could all just end in disillusionment. She's going to be disappointed in the end. I'm skipping the in love with Dorian story here. There's Dorian lying on the sofa with terror in every tingling fiber of his body. I think he's still just scared of old James Vane, but okay, it says it's because life is a burden for him. The dreadful death of the keeper, of the beater, shot like a wild animal, but of course he's just worried it's a presentiment, is that the right word? It's an omen of death coming for him. He'd nearly swooned at nearly fainted at what Lord Henry said about wanting to know a murderer. Rang for the servant, decides to leave town, not to sleep another night in the country. It was an ill-omened place. Death walked there in the sunlight. The grass of the forest had been spotted with blood. He wrote a note to Lord Henry, telling him he was going up to town to consult his doctor, asking him to entertain the guests. There's a knock, saying the head keeper wished to see him, send him in. Dorian pulls his checkbook out of the door and thinks it's kind of paying money to the family. I suppose you've come about the unfortunate accident of this morning. Yes, sir. Ooh. Was the poor fellow married? Had he any people dependent on him? Dorian said, looking bored. If so, I wouldn't like them to be left in want. I'll send them any sum of money you may think. We don't know who he is, sir. Now that's a surprise. Perhaps Dorian thought it was one of the normal servants or someone related to the servants here at Selby. The head keeper says, that's what I've took the liberty of coming to you about. Don't know who he is, says Dorian listlessly. What do you mean? Wasn't he one of your men? No, sir. Never seen him before. Seems like a sailor, sir. And we only know of one sailor in this novel, and it's James Vane. And Dorian thinks the same. The pen dropped from Dorian Gray's hand, and he felt as if his heart had suddenly stopped beating. A sailor? Did you say a sailor? Yes, sir. He looks as if he'd been sort of a sailor, tattooed on both arms and that kind of thing. Was there anything found on him? Anything that would tell us his name? Some money, sir? And a 6-shooter gun. No name. Decent-looking man, but rough-like. Sort of a sailor. Dorian started to his feet. Terrible hope fluttered past him, a terrible hope that this could be James Vane. Where's the body? Quick, I must see it at once. It's in an empty stable. The folk don't like to have that sort of thing in their house. They say a corpse brings bad luck. Go there at once and meet me. Tell one of the grooms to bring my horse around. And never mind, I'll go to the stables myself. It'll save time. In less than a quarter of an hour, Dorian Gray was galloping down the long avenue as hard as he could go. The trees seemed to sweep past him in spectral or ghostly procession, and wild shadows to fling themselves across his path. Once the mare swerved at a white gale post and nearly threw him. He lashed her across the neck with his crop, his whip. She cleft the dusky air like an arrow. The stones flew from her hoofs. At last he reached the home farm. 2 men were loitering there in the yard. He leapt from the saddle and threw the reins to one of them. In the farthest stable a light was glimmering. Something seemed to tell him that the body was there, and he hurried to the door and put his hand upon the latch. There he paused for a moment, feeling that he was on the brink of a discovery that would either make or mar, spoil his life. Then he thrust the door open and entered. On a heap of sacking in the far corner was lying the dead body of a man dressed in a coarse shirt and a pair of blue trousers. A spotted handkerchief had been placed over the face. A coarse candle, stuck in a bottle, sputtered beside it. Dorian Gray shuddered. He felt that his could not be the hand to take the handkerchief away, and he called to one of the farm servants to come to him. "Take that thing off the face, I wish to see it," he said, clutching at the doorpost for support. When the farm servant had done so, he stepped forward. A cry of joy broke from his lips. Unusual reaction at a dead body, but of course this tells us it's James, and the joy means he's no longer in danger. The man who had been shot in the thicket was James Vane. Da, 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 da. He stood there for some minutes, looking at the dead body. As he rode home, his eyes were full of tears, for he knew he was safe. So these are not tears of sorrow for the dead body, but tears of joy that he's safe. That's chapter 18. It's such a shame that there's only 2 chapters left in this deadly, thrilling novel. Oscar Wilde's masterpiece, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Oscar Wilde subscribed just the other day. Please subscribe too.